on what amendments to allow in the transportation bill. It sets federal and highway projects for the next 2 years. The Senate will recess between 12:30 and 2:15 Eastern for their weekly party lunches, and after that we could see more debate on the transportation bill. And now to live coverage of the U.S. Senate.
The Senate will come to order. Today's opening prayer will be offered by American Legion National Chaplain Gerald Theriault from Schriever, Louisiana.
Let us join in the spirit of prayer. Heavenly Father, we humbly gather in united prayer, giving thanks for your blessings to this body. In your holy name, I ask that the wise use of the gift of reasoning that you have granted to all be strengthened here within this chamber, so that the opportunities and paths to cooperation with just solutions will be realized. Our nation has been blessed with the establishment and the appreciation for a system of government that is unlike any other. As we have been blessed with the privilege of selecting a few to represent many, it is in them we place our trust that they will seek your counsel and do what is best for all. Dear God, bless them during their research and in their deliberations, and have them to know that all things are possible through your grace. As we enjoy the freedoms that we have and the privilege of supporting the way in which our government operates, we ask your blessings on the shapers and protectors of these freedoms, our Congress, our President, our military, our first responders, and our nation. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., February 28, 2012. To the Senate. Under provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Christopher A. Coons, a senator from the state of Delaware, to perform the duties of the chair. Son Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
The Majority Leader. Roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Well, the Senate gavelled in just a moment ago. They are in a what's expected to be a brief quorum call as leadership is gathering on the floor and preparing remarks for the start of the Senate day. Senators will spend the morning on general speeches, and they'll continue negotiating amendments on the transportation bill, which sets highway and federal projects for the next 2 years. Senate's expected to recess at about 12:30 to 2:15 for their weekly party lunches. And then we expect more debate on the transportation bill. The House working today on a bill to change regulation of for-profit colleges. The Education Department set minimum standards for private for-profit colleges and training institutes. That bill would eliminate those standards. You can see live House coverage on C-SPAN. They gavelled in just moments ago.
Voting leader remarks, Mr. President, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 12:30. The majority will control the first 30 minutes. Republicans will control the second 30 minutes. The Senate will recess from 12:30 to 2:15 today for our weekly caucus meetings. I'm told, Mr. President, that H.R. 1173 is due for a second reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the second time.
H.R. 1173, an act to repeal the class program.
Mr. President, I would object to any further proceedings at this time to this piece of legislation.
The objection is heard. The bill will be placed on the calendar.
Mr. President, last evening, in an hour set aside at the request of Senators Pryor and Alexander, a very, very good conversation took place here on the Senate floor. Senator Pryor and Senator Alexander are exemplary in trying to work things out. They are good legislators because they understand that no side gets their way. I've been here a long time, and I've been fortunate to get pieces of legislation passed that I sponsored and worked toward, but I've never, ever had a piece of legislation that I introduced that wound up with that piece of legislation. Always there are changes. That's the legislative process. And that's what Senator Pryor and Senator Alexander talked about yesterday evening. It was important. They talked about the need to bring bills to the floor. They focused on appropriation bills, and rightfully so. I'm a longtime member of the Appropriations Committee, as is the Republican leader. And we understand the importance of working on these bills. In the last number of years, we haven't been able to do individual appropriation bills except on rare occasions. We've done these omnibus and minibus, and we're trying to get away from that. And I think the framework laid last night was extremely important. The Republican leader and I have talked individually, personally, away from everyone about the need to get this done for the integrity of the Senate. And the speech last night really helped what I think the Republican leader and I want to get done. We need the agreement of Senate Republicans and Democrats that we work together to complete this important work. And they talked about appropriation bills. Senator Warner, Senator Hagan joined Senator Pryor, Senator Isaacson, Collins, Boozman, and Graham joined Senator Alexander. So it really was a significant number of senators who talked about wanting to do the same thing, and I commend and applaud their work doing that. Be happy to.
Observations on what he's just said. We have negotiated the top line for the discretionary spending for this coming fiscal year. That process is normally done by the passage of a budget by the House, a budget by the Senate, and some reconciliation between the two bodies on the top line. But we already have that number, and I want to second what my friend the Majority Leader said. There's no good reason for this institution not to move forward with an appropriations process that avoids what we have done so frequently under both parties for years and years, either continuing resolutions or omnibus appropriations. We have an opportunity to avoid that this year. It's the basic work of Congress, and I just want to second what the Majority Leader said and congratulate Senator Alexander and Senator Pryor for their leadership on this issue, and I hope we can join together and do the basic work of government this year and do it in a timely fashion. So I commend the Majority Leader and associate myself with his comments.
I've spoken to Senator Inouye, Chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and he is beginning with Senator Cochran the hearing process where administration officials come in and report to the individual appropriations subcommittees. And Senator Inouye thinks that come late April we can start moving some of these bills to the floor. We have to wait until the House does something because otherwise we get into procedural hurdles. But the House, I'm told, wants to move these quickly also. So I hope that we can get these bills done. And, Mr. President, the first real good experience I had here in the Senate was working as a conferee on individual appropriation bills. That's fun. That's what legislation is all about, and we've gotten away from that, and I hope we can get back to doing some good things in that regard. Mr. President, when President Obama took office 3 years ago. The auto industry was on a life support system. It was in really bad shape. I'm sorry to say that life support system that the Detroit auto industry was surviving on, the Republicans wanted to pull the plug. One man who is now seeking the Republican nomination for President of the United States said, and I quote, "We should kiss the American automobile industry goodbye." End of quote. You can't make up stuff like that, Mr. President. That's what he actually said. He called the death of American auto manufacturers virtually guaranteed. Virtually guaranteed is another direct quote. And so he argued we should just let Detroit go bankrupt. But he wasn't alone. If he were just alone, that would be a lone wolf crying in the wilderness. But that was not the way it is. Republicans in this chamber agreed. Many of them agreed. Democrats, though, Mr. President, weren't willing to give up on American manufacturing. Because saving the auto industry wasn't about saving corporations. It was about saving millions of Americans who work for these corporations. It wasn't about saving the people who own race cars. It was about saving the people who work on assembly lines, making the parts to keep those race cars running. There's no way Democrats would walk away from millions of Americans whose jobs were on the line. Americans who work in dealerships and distribution centers and manufacturing plants across the country were depending on us to do something, and we did. We didn't give up the fight to save the auto industry. We didn't give up even when one Senate Republican called our efforts, quote, "a road to nowhere." Here, Mr. President, the verdict is in. We were right. The American auto industry has added 160,000 jobs just in the last 24 months alone. Last year, General Motors reported record profits and sold more vehicles than any other car company in the world. Chrysler is profitable again. People are boasting about the quality of American cars. And Chrysler is going faster in the United States than any other major automobile manufacturer. So when a Republican presidential frontrunner said we should kiss the American automobile industry goodbye, he couldn't have been more wrong. We all make mistakes. We all get one wrong occasionally. The test of character is admitting when we make that mistake. And it's time for Republicans to recognize that saving Americans and their automobile manufacturing industry, save the American automobile manufacturing industry, and millions of middle-class jobs was the right thing to do. Mr. President, good news from the auto industry and 24 months of private sector job growth are evidence our country is headed in the right direction. But too many Americans are still hurting financially and struggling to find work. And it's crucial Congress continue efforts to create jobs and rebuild our economy. So Democrats are moving forward with a bipartisan package of bills that will spur small business growth. These measures will improve innovators' access to capital. That's so important. And we'll streamline how companies sell stock through initial public offerings, or as they're called, IPOs. These pieces of legislation will also protect the rights of investors. Next week, Chairman Johnson, the senior senator from South Dakota, will hold a banking committee hearing on this issue. It will be the third hearing on these measures since December. Senate Democrats have been working on these measures for a long time, and I'm so happy to have read that House Republicans are joining Democrats to move this legislation. Common sense issues like these should not have to turn into knockdown, drag-out fights. This is something we should agree on. These companies need the ability to get cash to innovate, to grow, to build. And this legislation that is being promulgated in the Banking Committee, and the hearing takes place there, is very important to our country. I look forward to moving these measures and our economy forward with the help of my Republican colleagues.
Mr. President.
The Republican leader.
Mr. President, over the past few weeks, the American people have begun to feel the painful effects of President Obama's energy policy. Make no mistake, the rising price of gasoline isn't simply the result of forces we can't control. It is, to a large extent, the result of a vision that this president laid out even before he was elected to office. That vision was on clear display just last week. As millions of Americans groaned at the rising cost of a gallon of gasoline, the president took to the microphones to talk about a far-off day when Americans might be able to use algae as a substitute for gas. Algae as a substitute for gas. And then, dusting off the same talking points Democrats have been using for decades, he claimed that there's no short-term solution to the problem. In other words, he kicked the can down the road for another day, another time, abdicating leadership on yet another issue of national significance. So this morning, I think it's worthwhile to take a step back from the rhetoric and look at what this president has actually done about this problem and what his energy policies would mean for the future. Because according to numerous private and public energy experts, gas prices are only going to keep rising in the weeks and months ahead, going up and up and up. Some say the average price for a gallon of gasoline could hit $4 by late spring, early summer, and could reach $5 or even $6 in some areas of our country. And when that moment comes, Americans should know what the administration had to do with it. For starters, let's not forget that as a candidate, the president himself said he preferred what he called a gradual adjustment to gas prices. In other words, higher prices that went up slowly so people didn't feel the pinch quite as acutely. Let's also recall that after the election, the president chose an energy secretary who said he wanted gas prices more in line with those over in Europe, where folks pay about $8 a gallon for gas. That's what they pay for gas over in Europe, where the energy secretary said we should be looking to establish gas prices. And let's not forget that the president chose as an interior secretary a man who, as a U.S. senator, objected to increased oil and gas drilling here at home, even if the price of gas exceeded $10 a gallon, right here on the Senate floor. So no one should be surprised at the fact that we're well on our road to European gas prices when the president and two cabinet officials he chose to deal with the issue are all on record supporting them. So let's be honest. The only problem the president sees in all of this is the political blowback he's getting for it. And that's why last week he gave another speech, this time to absolve himself from any of the blame for high gas prices, even as he sought to take credit for the actions of the private sector that his predecessors took to increase energy production here at home. Now, it's kind of interesting. The president seems to blame his predecessor on a weekly basis for the problems we face today, but when he finds something he likes, he doesn't commend him but claims it as an achievement for himself. Yes, oil production is at an all-time high in this country thanks to the decisions that were made before this president took office. But let's be very clear about something. The actions of this president are driving down oil production. And here's how. This president continues to limit offshore areas of energy production and is granting fewer leases to public land for oil drilling. His administration is imposing regulations that will further drive up the cost of gasoline for the consumer. He wants to raise taxes on oil and gas, a proposal that the Congressional Research Service tells us will increase the price of oil and gas and, by the way, send jobs overseas. And he alone rejected the Keystone XL pipeline, a potentially game-changing domestic energy project that promises not only greater independence from Middle Eastern oil, but tens of thousands of private sector jobs. Now, the president has done all of those things all while claiming that there aren't any silver bullets. Well, the fact is this president's policies are designed and intended to drive up energy prices, reduce domestic oil production, increase our demand on foreign sources of oil, and drive high-paying American jobs overseas. Those are the direct result of the policies of this administration. So forget the rhetoric. That's this president's record. And it's in perfect keeping with the vision he set out at the beginning of his administration. This president will go to any length to drive up gas prices and pave the way for his ideological agenda. That's this president's notion of fairness, that struggling Americans pay more at the pump while their tax dollars go to prop up solar companies like Solyndra and the executives who run them into the ground. Well, Mr. President, I don't think it's particularly fair, speaking of fairness, I don't think it's particularly fair for people who are out there trying to scrape a living together to subsidize bonuses for folks who wouldn't even have a business without a taxpayer handout. That's not my definition of fairness. But that's the economy this president wants. That's what his policies lead to. That's his vision. So in my view, reversing this president's wrong-headed energy policies is the silver bullet. Look, the president can taunt his critics for suggesting we actually use the resources we have, but I think the American people realize that a president who's out there talking about algae, when we're having to choose between whether to buy groceries or fill up the tank, is the one who is out of touch. Now, Mr. President, Americans get this issue. They understand it fully. They get that we need to increase oil production right here at home, not simply rely on pipe dreams like algae, or by wasting billions of taxpayer dollars on more failed clean energy projects like Solyndra, especially at a time when we're running trillion-dollar deficits. We can't afford it. It's time for the president to join with Republicans and put American energy and economic security ahead of his own ideological agenda. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved, and under the previous order, there will now be a period of morning business until the hour of 12:30 p.m. with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled by the leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first hour, the Republicans the second half hour.
Mr. President.
Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I was heartened by the dialogue between Senators Reid and McConnell this morning, talking about more bipartisan cooperation, civility, cooperation to try to deal with appropriation bills. And I'd like to commend to the Republican leader not just those important issues, but the equally important issue of judicial nominations. It's no secret that the Senate's process for considering nominations has deteriorated under the Obama administration because of resistance from the Republican side of the aisle. It is a long-honored tradition in America that a President of the United States fills vacancies on the federal courts with the advice and consent of Senate. And that has been the process since the beginning of this republic. Yet today we find stacked on our calendar literally 19 judicial nominees pending on the Senate floor. 14 of these nominees were reported from the Judiciary Committee last year, some of them as far back as October. They've been sitting here for months. 17 of the nominees were reported out of committee with broad bipartisan support, 12 of them unanimously. 10 nominees, incidentally, are supported by their Republican home state senators. The bottom line, judicial nominees with no controversy, widespread bipartisan approval, are being held up on the Senate calendar and not approved. Why? Well, I can tell you why. It's fairly clear. It is part of a strategy that says if you hold up the judicial nominees as long as possible, in comes that moment of the so-called Thurman rule or Thurman tradition. This relates to Senator Strom Thurmond of South Carolina, who basically said when we are engaged in the depths of a presidential campaign, the Senate should stop approving judicial nominees. There's nothing in the rules that requires that. There's certainly nothing in the Constitution. And in fact, we have, in our own way, found exceptions to it in the past. But what we are seeing now is an effort by the Republicans to hold up or stop judicial nominees in the hopes that they'll be left vacant through the entire calendar year, and then, if they have their way at the polls, a Republican president will fill the vacancies a year from now with new nominees. That is crass. It is unfair. The men and women who submit their names to be considered for judicial nomination go through a rigorous background check at many different levels, first by the senators who would nominate them, then by the White House, then the routine examination by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, then once reported to the Senate Judiciary Committee for further investigation and hearing. Their lives are on hold during this process. They wait on the Senate. And once they have cleared these hurdles and finally reached the calendar, many of them feel that they can breathe a sigh of relief. A unanimous vote or strong bipartisan vote in the Judiciary Committee used to be a signal of success on the floor. Not anymore. At this point, they reach the ultimate roadblock. They are stopped on the Senate floor by the Republican minority. It isn't just unfair to judicial nominees, men and women of quality, many of whom have been proposed by Republican senators. It is fundamentally unfair to our court system. You see, many of these nominees are filling vacancies that are absolutely essential. Last week, I received a letter from the Chief Judge of the Northern District of Illinois, Judge Jim Holderman. His district is one that has been declared a judicial emergency, meaning the backlog of cases is stacking up and the vacancies need to be filled. He was writing me and Senator Kirk asking that we do everything in our power to move two non-controversial, strongly supported nominees through the Judiciary Committee. Well, they're moved through. These two, who came through a bipartisan process, are now sitting on the Senate calendar. They are John Lee and Jay Thorpe. John Lee, my nominee; Jay Thorpe, Senator Kirk's nominee. A bipartisan agreement by bipartisan committee has led to their selection. No one has questioned their ability to serve well on the federal court. What Judge Holderman wrote to say was the vacancies that they would fill have been declared judicial emergencies by the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts. More than 1,000 cases that would have been addressed by judges in those positions have been delayed. The other judges of the district have worked to resolve these cases as promptly, but they need help. He went on to say, recently when two active judges in the Northern District were in the hospital and were unable to take new assignments, new civil case filings in our district court continued to increase despite this fact. Judge Holderman concluded saying, the people of the Northern District of Illinois need your assistance. He writes to Senator Kirk and myself, and the full Senate should promptly confirm Jay Thorpe and John Lee. Mr. President, this is a classic illustration. Well-qualified individuals, having cleared the hurdles, receiving strong bipartisan support in the Senate Judiciary Committee, are mired down on the Senate calendar. Time after time, we see when we can finally spring one of these nominations that it'll have 80 or 90 votes of senators who approve it. They're non-controversial. It is clearly a slow-down strategy so that the other side of the aisle, saying their prayers that they can replace President Obama, will literally leave these vacancies for a year or more in the hopes that another president will pick another person. That is unfair to the process. It's certainly unfair to the nominees. It is unfair to this system of government where we are shirking our responsibility to advise and consent for critical vacancies to be filled so that our federal courts can operate in the best interests of justice across America. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senator from New York.
Thank you. And first, let me thank my colleague from Illinois for his usual articulate and prescient comments about our judicial crisis, and that's what we have here in the Senate and in the third branch of government. And I rise today, along with many of my colleagues, to address a serious problem for which there's an easy solution. We have a crisis in our third and independent branch of government, and it is one that only we in the Senate can solve. And we can solve it. We need to come together, as we have in the past, and confirm judges to our Article III courts and dispense with the petty politics and hostage-taking. Mr. President, let me just give you one example of how our process is broken down. In December, for the second year in a row, my colleagues across the aisle refused to consent to confirm even a single judicial nomination before the end of the Senate session. This senseless rejection of the Senate's long-standing practice of confirming consensus nominees is starting to do real damage to our federal courts. 1 out of 10, let me repeat that, 1 out of 10 on the federal bench, 1 out of 10 seats, 1 out of 10 seats on the federal bench is currently vacant. Judicial vacancies are double, 2 times what they were at this point in President Bush's first term. We have confirmed only 3 judicial nominees this session, only 5 in the past 2 months, and only 11 in the last 90 days. And of the 3 judges whom we've confirmed this session, we've had to file cloture on 2 of them. This isn't a responsible use of the Senate's advise and consent powers. Rather, this is a handful of people, plain and simple, Mr. President, using the Senate's procedures to thwart the will of a majority of Americans. The vast majority of Americans want us to confirm good, moderate, pragmatic judges to the U.S. district courts. After all, judges on the district court don't make law, they follow law. Much less so, they're not supposed to make law at all. Courts of appeals have a little more latitude, and of course the Supreme Court can make law, although they're supposed to follow tradition and precedent and claim they do. We can discuss that a different day. But a few outside groups are trying to accomplish in the third branch of government what they have been unable to accomplish in the other branches of government by making sure that judges with moderate, pragmatic credentials don't get confirmed in hopes that they can fill up the bench with people who meet their narrow ideology at some point in the future. Now, to be sure, my colleagues have offered a wide variety of reasons to explain their inability to consent to vote on district court judges. Some have said they're upset about the President's improper use of his recess appointment powers, powers about which 5 experts can give you 5 different opinions. What that has to do with the judicial appointments is beyond me. Some have said they're upset about getting floor time on something that's not even germane to judicial nominations. To hold the third branch of government hostage because you have a different beef on a legislative issue, it's virtually unprecedented, at least certainly to the extent it's been done here. And some have given in to terrible, misleading, and sometimes even vicious attacks on pending nominees. Mr. President, I have seen material circulated by outside groups that appear ready to oppose nominees using any and all tactics. Some of it, not all, not most, but some, and any one is too many, can only be described as bigoted. I've seen the letters to our colleagues here, attempt to pressure them. This behavior needs to stop, and it certainly needs to stop having an effect on any member in this body. I've seen material that twists a candidate's record beyond all recognition. In fact, just before recess, one group circulated patently inaccurate quotes that were supposed to be from a brief written by now Judge Jesse Furman for a client. Look, I've said time and time again, and I will say once more today, the Senate certainly has an obligation to take a hard look at the President's judicial nominees. My view is that ideology does matter, and every senator here has the right to make sure that a President's judicial nominees are within the mainstream. I would even admit that some definitions of mainstream are different than others. But when nominee after nominee after nominee, many of whom were reported unanimously out of the Judiciary Committee, which has some very conservative as well as some very liberal members, when those are held up by a handful of people, We're not talking about views out of the mainstream. We're talking about something larger and, frankly, less defensible. There will always be nominees, and especially to the courts of appeals, about whom we'll disagree. There will be those whom some of us view as so extreme that we'll refuse to give our consent to holding an up or down vote. But, Mr. President, let's be clear. That is not what is going on today. What is going on today is obstruction, plain and simple. Obstruction against anybody, any nominee, and obstruction at unprecedented levels. The total number of federal circuit and district judges confirmed during the first 3 years of the Obama administration is far less than for previous presidents. The Senate is more than 40 confirmations behind the pace we set confirming President Bush's nominees in 2001 through 2004. The sheer amount of resistance to President Obama's district court judges really indicates the level of obstruction we're facing. In 3 years, President Obama's nominees have received 5 times as many no votes as Bush's district court nominees did over 8 years. Isn't that incredible? The proof is in the pudding. The President's nominees for district court aren't out of the mainstream. Almost all of them have logged years in public service or worked in law firms or excelled in other ways that characterize the nominees of previous presidents. The issue is that the standard has changed. It is no longer, will this judge be good for the country and meet the standards we demand from an Article III judge? Now it is, did I personally approve of this judge, and if I didn't, what can I get by voting for him or her? Or, if I didn't, I'm going to block that judge and tie the Senate in a knot so judges, only in my narrow viewpoint, can be appointed, even though the president's of a different party and of a different philosophy, even though the majority of the Senate on both sides of the aisle are of a different philosophy. This is nothing short of tragic. I implore my colleagues, think about what you're doing. Let's come together, as I know we can, and confirm qualified district court judges without further gamesmanship, without further obstruction, without a further view. It's my way or the highway, and if I don't get my way, I'm going to try and cripple. 1 out of 10 vacancies is getting close to that. There are emergencies on many circuits. Cripple the Article III branch of the government. The future of our courts and even this body could well depend on it. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from California.
Mr. President, I heard the remarks of the distinguished senator from New York, and obviously I agree, and I guess would like to add my 6 cents to the arguments presented. I'm a 19-year member of the Judiciary Committee, so I've had a front row seat for judicial nominations for a long, long time. And over 800 judges have been confirmed since I came to the Senate. Now, it wasn't so long ago that liberals and conservatives could easily win confirmation as long as they were well qualified, would be fair-minded, had judicial temperament, they were confirmed. And it may even surprise some that Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was confirmed by a vote of 96-3. And Justice Antonin Scalia was confirmed 98-0. That was a different time. Today, partisanship has stalled even the most uncontroversial judicial appointments. Senate Republicans allowed no nominees to be confirmed at the end of the last session and have allowed but 5 so far this year. In this environment, even those reported out of committee by voice vote without any controversy are unable to receive a floor vote for many months, if they ever receive one at all. Let me give you a recent example. A judge that I nominated to the President, Judge Kathy Benjavengo's nomination to the Southern District of California was approved by the Judiciary Committee by voice vote, yet she waited 4 months for a floor vote. And then she was ultimately confirmed 90-6, showing that there simply was no need to hold up the nomination in the first place. This level of obstruction is relatively new and has impeded the confirmation process for both judicial and executive branch nominees. Let's do a quick comparison. Nearly 80% of President George W. Bush's judicial nominees during his first term were confirmed, 80%. In contrast, less than 60% of President Obama's judicial nominees have been confirmed. As a result, the judicial vacancy rate stands at nearly 10%. That's double what it was when President Bush left office. Similarly, during the first session of the 112th Congress, the confirmation rate of President Obama's executive branch appointments was only 51%. President George W. Bush and Bill Clinton each had a confirmation rate of over 70% during comparable periods in their presidency. So clearly, there have been a change post-Clinton. And I think that's what we're talking about. This is not good for the judiciary. It is not good for this body. And it is not good as standard operating practice of the United States Senate. It's clear that we're seeing a degree of obstruction that's unprecedented and that hampers the ability of the judicial and executive branches to perform their constitutional functions. It is preventing us, the legislative branch, from fulfilling the responsibility that we owe to the two other branches of government. In my state, we have 3 nominees, each for positions the Judicial Conference has declared to be judicial emergencies, which means extraordinarily heavy caseloads. These should win confirmation without delay. I'll give you one. Judge Jacqueline Wynn, a nominee for the Ninth Circuit. She is a remarkable jurist with an impeccable record. She was confirmed to the district court 97-0 in 2009. She was approved by the Judiciary Committee for the Ninth Circuit by a bipartisan voice vote. Yet her nomination has been pending on the floor for nearly 3 months. An easy one. Unanimously passed, has served as a district court judge, could be voted for and passed, if not by 100%, very close to it. The Ninth Circuit, which has by far more pending cases per appellate panel than any other appellate court, needs her to be confirmed without further delay. There's a reason for this. I think Republicans don't like some of the appellate courts. Therefore, what they try to do, candidly, is keep the positions vacant in hope that after the election there'll be a Republican president and they will get their nominees through. Well, you know, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. And this is not, I think, a good way to handle judicial appointments. Let me give you another one. Paul Watford should be confirmed quickly to the Ninth Circuit. He's eminently qualified. He clerked for conservative Ninth Circuit Judge Alex Kozinski and Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. He served as a federal prosecutor, and he's been a distinguished practitioner of appellate law in California for many years. He's uncontroversial. He's been endorsed by the former president of the Los Angeles chapter of the Federalist Society, by conservative law professor Eugene Volokh, and by the general counsels of several major corporations that he has represented in appellate cases. The Senate should confirm him without delay. Another, Michael Fitzgerald, a nominee to the Central District of California, should also be confirmed quickly. This is a court that ranks as the 9th busiest in the nation in terms of filings per judgeship. And Mr. Fitzgerald is an extraordinarily qualified nominee with 25 years of experience as a federal prosecutor and as a lawyer in private practice. His nomination was also reported by the Judiciary Committee by a bipartisan voice vote. Yet his nomination has been waiting for a vote on the floor for nearly 4 months. All of this unnecessary. They could go through by unanimous consent. Now, I understand that some of my Republican colleagues believe that President Obama's recent recess appointments are a reason to delay needed confirmations to overburden courts around the country. And I would simply remind my colleagues of a bit of history and ask them to think carefully about whether they want to go down this very dangerous path. Many will recall that President Bush made 2 controversial recess appointments to the 11th Circuit and the 6th Circuit in early 2004. Like Republicans now, Democrats were upset about the president's appointments. Nevertheless, in the 3 months that followed, Democrats permitted numerous circuit court and district court nominees to be confirmed. The Senate continued to act on such nominees until September of 2004, 2 months before the presidential election. So I say to my colleagues, and I say this respectfully, take a step back. Do not obstruct every judicial nomination from this president. Our judicial system depends on a Senate willing to do its constitutional duty and provide advice and consent to judicial nominees. Most pending nominees are well-qualified consensus choices for courts that urgently need them to begin their service. We should confirm them without delay. You know, our job is to vote. Our job is not really to obstruct, to delay. It's to vote because we function on a majority system. And if you don't think someone is qualified, if you don't believe they have judicial temperament, if you don't believe they have enough experience, if you don't like them for any reason, vote no. That's entirely within the prerogative of a senator. But to hold them up, despite judicial emergencies, despite high caseloads, is to impact the system of justice. And I think this 10% vacancy factor now indicates that the condition of justice is, in fact, being affected throughout our country, and particularly in Ninth Circuit and in California cases, as well as many other states. So I thank the chair, and I yield the floor. The absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. President,
The senator from California.
I beg your pardon. I note the absence of a quorum.
The Senate is in a quorum call.
senator from Delaware is recognized.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the proceedings under the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Madam President, I rise today to continue to address an issue which I've just had the joy of hearing you and the senators from New York and from Illinois speak to. And that concern that I raise today is the ongoing crisis in our courts, the nearly 10% vacancy in judicial positions all across the United States. I rise today as the senator from Delaware, a senator from Delaware, the junior senator from Delaware, but also as a member of the Delaware Bar and a former federal court clerk, and someone who has, I think, a personal sense from that experience and my service on the Judiciary Committee of the consequences of these delays, the consequences of steadily climbing caseloads, significant judicial vacancies, judicial emergencies in districts across our great country, including the state of California, and what that means for people, for companies, for communities for whom justice is being delayed and thus denied. Earlier this month, I attended the investiture ceremony of Judge Richard Andrews, who was sworn into the U.S. District Court for Delaware. This is the first time in 6 years that the very busy District Court of Delaware has had a full complement of all of its district court judges. And although I am relieved and the people of Delaware are grateful to have a full bench, and although Judge Andrews is an extremely talented lawyer and a devoted public servant and utterly nonpartisan, just the sort of district court nominee of whom the presiding officer just spoke, his nomination took nearly 6 months to be confirmed by the Senate. I'm glad that Judge Andrews has made it through, because in the Senate the confirmation process seems to be even more broken this year than last. When I joined the Senate in 2010, judicial nominations had slowed to a crawl. And I watched with dismay as folks who I viewed as highly qualified were blocked. Goodwin Liu, for example, a brilliant and qualified legal scholar, a nominee twice to the Ninth Circuit, could not overcome a GOP filibuster, in part payback for a view, I believe, on the other side of the aisle of the rough handling of Miguel Estrada, whose nomination was defeated during the Bush presidency. What I've been most concerned about as a freshman senator is how the history here, lying about this chamber, seems to steadily pile up session after session, and the process seems to be weighed down by this burden of history. But next, Caitlin Halligan, an extremely accomplished attorney without a single partisan blemish on her record, was nominated to the D.C. Circuit, and her nomination, in my view, also was blocked based on a grotesque misrepresentation of her actual record. The major talking point against her nomination, if I recall right, was that the D.C. Circuit already had more than enough judges. Judge Halligan would have been the 9th judge on that court. Notably, all the GOP members who spoke against her had no qualms when this Senate confirmed 10th and 11th judges to sit on that very same circuit during the Bush nomination period. But these sorts of fine points of history, I think, are lost on the people, the communities, and the companies across our nation who go to the courthouse seeking justice and find none. In 2012, as some of the previous senators have spoken, we have so far confirmed just 5 judges. Today there are 19 nominees on the floor, 12 who came out of our Judiciary Committee unanimously, and are now languishing on our executive calendar. Republicans have no stated objection to these nominees, but refuse to grant consent for a vote to be scheduled. President Obama's nominees have waited 4 times longer after committee approval than did President Bush's nominees at this point in his first term. And the Senate is more than 40 confirmations behind the pace set during the Bush administration. It's not just judges that have also been the subject of this ongoing waiting down. The executive calendar, which I have the privilege to flip through every time I preside, is filled with vacancies, with nominees to complete complements in every major department, in every major independent agency in this government. It is more than a dozen pages long of nominations that have sat for months and months. Last month, in response to the Republican obstructionism in moving this executive calendar and in filling these administrative vacancies, President Obama made recess appointments: the Consumer Protection Chief, Richard Cordray, and the National Labor Relations Board. Some of us on both sides of the aisle do agree that Congress and not the President has the right to declare when the Senate is in recess. But whatever your view of these appointments, there is no questioning that in either case, Republicans forced the issue through their unprecedented refusal to vote the President's nominees up or down and allow him to proceed with the progress of our nation. As Senators, we have a responsibility to advise the President as to nominations, and where we agree to consent, and where we don't, each of us is free to vote a no. Some Senators have suggested they will oppose all nominations in opposition to the President's recess appointments. And in my position, in my opinion, a pledge to oppose all nominations is a pledge not to do his or her job. In my view, we ought not to make such a pledge. In my view, while so many Americans are out of work and so many of us are here on the public payroll, we can, we should, and we must move forward with the judicial nominees. Madam President, this session began this morning with a very encouraging moment of harmony between the Majority Leader and the Republican Leader on the concept of moving ahead with appropriations. It is my hope and prayer we will do the same on judicial nominations as well. I call upon my colleagues on the other side to rethink this strategy of obstruction at all costs, because it is, in the end, the American people who pay the price. With that, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Texas is recognized.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to enter into a colloquy with my Republican colleagues for up to 30 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you. Madam President, I think it's obvious all around our country that Americans are struggling right now with gasoline prices. The average American family spent more than $4,000 a year last year, and it will be more this year before the additional devastating price increases that we're seeing now just wreak havoc on our economy. The national average price of a gallon of gasoline has gone up every single week, every single day for the last 3 weeks. Every single day for the last 3 weeks. In many parts of our country, prices at the pump are around $4 a gallon. But instead of encouraging an all-of-the-above approach, which the administration has said it is doing, the administration instead has been frustrating every domestic source of energy production that doesn't conform to a narrow view of alternative fuels. The President is opposed to increasing drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Reserve and opening additional areas of the outer continental shelf off the Alaskan coast. Now, the people of Alaska have voted to support the ANWR drilling because they know that ANWR is an area the size approximately of the state of South Carolina, and the part that would be drilled is approximately the size of Washington National Airport. So they know that this would be good jobs for Alaska, and it would not harm the environment at all because the drilling area is so very small in this vast wildlife reserve. The President has also restricted drilling on federal lands, opposes the development of shale gas and coal, will not open additional areas of the outer continental shelf in the lower 48 states, even though some state legislatures like Virginia have said they would like to do it, but the President has shut that down. The President opposes further drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, and nuclear energy is also now on the list, I guess, of moratoria, and he has rejected the Keystone XL pipeline. What the President does favor is the Saudis increasing oil production and increased use of solar, wind, and algae here at home. Mr. President, does that really substitute for an energy policy? Is that something that Americans can count on to increase the supply of energy in our country? Last week, the President said, we cannot drill our way to lower gas prices. This statement is inaccurate. Increased domestic production will go a long way towards stabilizing gas prices. Why does this President want
to turn his back on critical sources of domestic energy, which seem incomprehensible to anyone looking at this issue. So I have colleagues here on the floor that they come from different states, states where unemployment is high and people are looking for jobs and looking for alternatives. And I would just like to turn to the senator from the great state of Missouri, Senator Blunt, and ask the senator from Missouri if he